Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let me begin today's talk by a story, a real story that occurred almost 1,000 years ago, when the world was a very different place and the Muslims had the upper hand. It so happened that in a certain battle, the Sultan of the Muslims, the leader of the Muslim Ummah, by the name of Sultan Alp Arslan, faced the leader of the Roman Empire, the Emperor of Byzantium, Romanos IV. In this battle, the Muslim Khalifa was on one side and the Roman Emperor was on the other side. And it so happened that the Muslims won a resounding victory over the Christians. And the Muslim Emperor, or the Muslim Khalifa, managed to take the Christian Emperor as a prisoner of war. Never in the history of the world has a Muslim Khalifa had a Christian emperor as his prisoner. This is the first and only time it happened. So he called the Roman emperor to his audience and he asked him, if I had been the prisoner and you my captor, what would you have done to me? The Roman emperor said, if I had you in my power, I would have tortured you to death. I would have killed you and executed you. The Khalifa, the Sultan, he smiled and he said, but this is not what I have heard the Prophet Isa alayhi salam teaching. I have heard that your prophet, the Prophet Isa alayhi salam, teaches forgiveness and gentleness. And so I shall forgive you and I shall set you free and allow you to return to your lands. And that is exactly what he did. At a time when the Sultan, when the Khalifa could have been merciless, he chose to be merciful, because that is what the prophets of Allah taught him. And by quoting Jesus Christ, by quoting Isa ibn Maryam to the Emperor of Rome, it was as if he was saying, you are not the real followers of Jesus Christ. You are not the true followers of Isa ibn Maryam. You don't even manage to follow his own teachings. Rather, it is the Muslims who are truly the followers of the prophets of Allah. If this message could have been given 1,000 years ago, then surely it has much relevance today. If the Muslims could demonstrate their mercy at a time of power, they could demonstrate their forgiveness and tolerance, then how much more so do we need to embody those very traits? In February of this year, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, suggested that Muslims be allowed to use private arbitration courts based upon Islamic laws. The uproar that these remarks caused, the media, the politicians, they unleashed a vicious wave of anger and indignation, from the ravings of the tabloid press to the disgraceful call for the resignation from senior clerics. The irony in all of this, of course, is that such an alternative already exists in England. Orthodox Jews, for years, for decades, for centuries, have had parallel courts in which they judge by the laws of the Torah when it comes to marriage and divorce. So the question arises, if it's allowed for Orthodox Jews, why shouldn't Muslims be allowed the exact same freedom and rights? This indignation is a clear example of what has been termed Islamophobia, which is defined to be the irrational, the illogical fear of Islam. It is a fear that makes no sense. It is a fear that has no reason. It is nothing short of a phobia, Islamophobia. And there are many manifestations of this Islamophobia in our times. For example, the ban on the hijab. For example, the problems of building masjids here in the Western world. For example, the issue of freedom of speech. With regards to the hijab, there are many European nations such as the Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, Sweden. They are currently debating whether they can ban the burqa and the niqab. And in some places it is already banned. And of course, in France, What is France? And what will make you realize what France is? This country of France, once upon a time, it took the lead in spearheading the age of enlightenment upon Europe. Once upon a time, it championed freedom against state oppression and freedom against restrictive church laws. But now, it seems to be turning full circle and returning to the very state of affairs that they fought 2 centuries ago. The hijab ban is old news. Recently, this year, a new level of animosity was displayed when the nation's highest administrative court upheld the decision to deny citizenship to Faiza Silmi. Faiza Silmi, a Moroccan-born immigrant who was married to a Frenchman and had 2 children born in France. The reason she was denied citizenship, which laws had she transgressed? Which crimes had she committed? Her only crime for which she was legally denied the right of citizenship was that she freely chose to wear the burqa. And this was a legitimate grounds to claim that her radical practice of Islam was incompatible with French values. And it is not just the hijab that is proving to be problematic. In numerous cases over the Western world, Muslims are finding it more and more difficult to purchase property in order to build masjids. There have been demonstrations in Germany and Norway against the buildings of specific masjids. Here in London, all of you are aware of the controversy over the Markaz Mosque. It is just sad and pathetic the amount of attention this masjid is getting. This very week, an Anglican church advisor stated that the Olympic Masjid could create a breeding ground for extremists and would turn the surrounding areas of London into a ghetto. And just 4 months ago, a senior member of the Church of England's General Synod, the primary legislative body of the Anglican Church, publicly and shamelessly said, and I quote, "No more mosques in the UK. There are enough mosques for the Muslims in the country. They don't need any more," end quote. Of course, mention must also be made of the infamous cartoon controversy and the issue of freedom of expression. You are all familiar with the Danish caricatures of the Prophet ﷺ, and now recently the release of the book, The Jewel of Medina. But how many of you are aware that earlier this year, just a few months ago, a national museum in Austria displayed a picture of Jesus Christ and the 12 disciples in a very vulgar manner. The painter went out of his way to mock them and suggested an inappropriate relationship between them. Predictably, the museum was flooded with phone calls and letters from angry Catholics and indeed many Christians. And I wouldn't be surprised if Muslims also got angry, because we should have gotten angry for that. What did the museum do? The museum, in less than a week, took down the painting, quietly removed it and got rid of it. And it issued a statement. And I quote to you one paragraph of this statement. Listen to this. They state, "This has nothing to do with censorship. Rather, it corresponds with the understood reverence for the sacred. It is also an act of respect towards those believers who felt that this portrayal offended and provoked their deepest religious sensitivity," end quote. Did I hear that right? Really? Is that your excuse? Reverence for the sacred, respect towards believers, not wanting to provoke religious sentiment. Where were these very feelings when it was Muslim sentiment being provoked? Where were these very feelings when it was the Prophet of Islam being ridiculed?